Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today's guest is Dawn Whitten, a naturopath, herbalist, and international board certified lactation consultant with over 2 decades of experience supporting perinatal and early life health. A leading voice in functional and naturopathic medicine for mums and babies, Dawn's mission is to support practitioner education in the early life space, so they're well equipped to support breastfeeding, maternal health, prescribe safely, and think independently and critically. As a clinician, researcher, and sought-after educator, Dawn brings a rare depth of insight into breastfeeding, maternal health, and the infant microbiome. So whether you're a parent, practitioner, or simply curious about the infant microbiome and how it's shaped and seeded, this episode is not to be missed. So welcome, Dawn.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you here. And I know not only me is excited to have this conversation, but when I was planning my guests and I told my sisters who have children of their own that someone like you, an infant microbiome kind of expert and is coming on, they were just throwing questions at me. So it could have been a 5-part series that we were doing. And I was like, all right, well, maybe another time, but we have to kind of like cull it down to a topic that we can get in an episode. But there was so much that they wanted to know about, which not only tells me that there is, I guess, a thirst and a want to understand what's happening in that infant microbiome, those early stages, but also that they weren't able to find that information. So I think this is a really important chat that we're about to have to hopefully give people an insight into this very critical part of, I guess, our health and our microbiome, and hopefully send people away with, I guess, a bit more understanding as to why it's important, why we need to nurture it.
Sounds
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and it is like a universe in there. I mean, it's kind of like a galaxy where we keep finding new stars, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely that understanding that the adult microbiome, but I guess what we'll speak to is that we have different microbiomes and at different stages, and yeah, there's more and more that we're learning about it. So I thought, fantastic, let's get someone who knows what they're talking about on to have a chat. So I wanted to really set the scene and talk about, I guess, the early stages of that microbiome. I think sometimes people refer to, when we're talking about the critical window or an important window of development, is like that first 1,000 days of life or the first 3 years of life. But like, is it important in terms of shaping our long-term health with our adult microbiome? Like, what is important and what's happening in this first 1,000 days?
Yeah, excellent question. And I guess you think you're starting from like 2 cells to becoming like a 2-year-old child when we're thinking about that kind of critical window and all the organ and systems development that happens through that time. That does kind of lay some groundwork, which does shape our lifelong health in significant ways. So that appreciation is certainly shared amongst multidisciplinary, and I think we're very excited about the role that microbiome plays in that chapter. I'm of course very excited about the microbiome, but I think it's important to just put it in context of the other factors that are also, it's a critical window, and there's lots of drivers that can potentially affect development during that time. And the microbiome is one, probably a big one, but then there's also things, like your just access to basic nutrition, having a dedicated caregiver that's responding to you and nurturing you, and that secure attachment that you develop during that period. And then also just exposures to, potential disruptive influences. So we kind of appreciate the microbiome as sort of one piece amongst a kind of a landscape that might influence development, and infections, another kind of exposure that you could have during that time. And if you've got your maternal kind of protection from that through like the placenta and breastfeeding, that maternal hybrid immune system, we call it,
Mm.
protecting you through that time, then that's going to influence how you respond to those challenges and affect your development as well. But yes, the microbiome is seems to be a big piece during that time for sure. And yeah, it does seem to be, I guess we understand that during that chapter, the microbiome is on the way to developing into a sort of a healthy microbiome for later in life. There's sort of this idea that there's kind of this sequential evolution occurring.
Mm.
But we also understand that there's kind of those steps in development seem to potentially have really important functions for development. So you kind of have this almost special type of microbiome during that infant period that might be really important for supporting healthy development, and derangement of that could have some negative effects potentially.
Yeah, and I think like what you mentioned about the microbiome, as much as like that's what we're really talking about today, that like anything in health, especially as holistic practitioners, we are thinking about the bigger picture that we're needing connection and nurturing from our mothers. We're needing exposure to, nature. We're needing different, our diet. Like, so this is one piece of the puzzle that can affect our health. And we're going to obviously unpack this one piece of the puzzle, but just everyone that's listening to this, keep in mind that, if you do listen to this podcast and you're like, oh, like my daughter or my son or whoever I'm looking after, like they have been exposed to some microbiome disruptors, like keep in mind that this is again one piece of the puzzle, and that there are so many other things that you can be doing, that you probably are doing, that is nurturing a healthy development. So I guess that's just to try to take yourself off the hook. It's just more about empowerment, this podcast, more than judgment or anything else. So you mentioned that the first 1,000 days, and I guess that in this early infancy period, that there are potential links between what's happening there and what could be played out later in life. So what sort of health issues have we found to be linked to early microbiome disturbance?
Yeah, I think the areas where there's sort of strongest influence is allergy, and I imagine most of the listeners have probably, heard about that concept.
Mm.
And then also metabolic health issues, so obesity or risk of obesity or overweight later in childhood or adulthood, and potentially have playing a role in influencing neurodevelopment as well. So we see that the microbiome, there's a gut-brain axis there. So
For
yeah.
sure. All those things which you think about their connections as adults, like it's no different. We acknowledge, I guess there is difference, but it's very similar in thinking. We are understanding, acknowledging that how our gut is working as an adult will have its influences and symptoms occurring in different areas. I guess same goes for that infancy period. So that's super interesting that like those early stages, they're finding links to that as well. So I want to talk about, I guess, with that microbiome. So can we talk about one of the things which could be controversial, but we have to talk on it? It's a bit of an elephant in the room, is the impacts of vaginal birth and cesarean birth of children and how that can impact the microbiome. And it goes without saying that this is a judgment free. We understand there's many reasons for many different decisions that are made. It's more just about talking about what the science is saying and, what we kind of know about those different influences. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. And I think, it's an important one because I think in Australia, probably about a third of infants are born by cesarean birth. And
Mm.
of course, I guess it suggested that number is a bit too high. The World Health Organization says probably 10 to 15% of
Mm.
births it's necessary for there to be a cesarean birth. So there's, some questions for us to ask as a, not for parents to ask, but for us to ask as a society, why are they those stats so high?
Yeah.
What should we be changing about our maternity services? Yeah, but coming down to thinking about the impact on the microbiome, I think the thing about cesarean birth, I kind of think it is a bit of a triple whammy because we have not being born through the vaginal canal, but we also it's necessary also to have antibiotics during a cesarean birth, and that's given before the incision, so the infant is exposed in utero through the placenta to those antibiotics. And there is a good evidence base for that because we want a well mum afterwards.
Mm.
We don't want a serious infection in that womb. And there are countries where they have incredible hygiene, I guess, control, like Switzerland, where they actually do cesarean births often without antibiotics. But I think if you take it out of that setting, I certainly wouldn't want to risk it in where we don't have that, as well kind of organized and under control. So we've got the antibiotic exposure. And then unfortunately with cesarean birth, the stats suggest that, you might be, there's a greater chance of not exclusively breastfeeding. So we tend to have those three things kind of colliding. The third thing, I mean, there's lots we can do about that in terms of, again, back to a society, having good health system practices to really support and enable breastfeeding when we do have a more complicated birth. It's just, that really begs for everyone to kind of dig and really support that family. And also, I guess, the importance of breastfeeding support during pregnancy as well. So people are really set up to succeed. I mean, that, you're talking, you mentioned sensitive issues. This is a sensitive issue, but it's really, it takes a country to breastfeed.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some mothers that, there'll be reasons why they can't. But, again, our breastfeeding statistics are really a failing of us at a society level of just not having enough having too many barriers, and you don't really realize the barriers until you're in it as a mother. And some of those things will be subtle and some of them will be really obvious. But anyway, so if we have the collision of those three elements, it's actually kind of hard to tease apart what's causing what. But interestingly, when they look at infants that are born by cesarean birth who are exclusively breastfed, their ecosystems very quickly resemble a vaginally birthed infant. So this, I guess, speaks to the resilience of biology. And I think it can be just really comforting for mothers to know that their body has the ingredients to help their infant recover from this disturbance. And I find that really exciting. But I guess you think for a cesarean born infant, helping to support breastfeeding is sort of even more important because we understand that breast milk can be a source of some of those microbes that you miss out on if you are not coming through the vaginal canal, because it seems to be those microbes present in milk.
You've just raised so many points. And what I love about that is the wider lens on the issue being like a public health and policy and systemic issue in our society, that it very often isn't just the mother, at all. Like there are so many different things that are playing a role in someone's, I guess, outcome in terms of what they can and can't and what they will eventually do. And I think that's a really important recognition because especially when you think about how our numbers fare to other countries, it certainly asks, it begs the question, what's happening in our system that is meaning that we're having slightly higher rates of cesareans. And I think like that's just clearly we don't know the answer. Like, we're not here to solve that problem, but it's, we're posing the question like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
So there's one thing that I wanted to chat about because there is a bit of a practice or and maybe it's just an opinion, or you might be like, I can't answer to that, I can't speak to that, but there's the practice of swabbing with a cloth the mother's vaginal microbiome and kind of putting it over the infant's face, if they're coming through, if they've been birthed by a C-section, to get, I guess, that inoculation and microbiome exposure. Are there any legs to that in terms of that helping with that that seeding phase, or is it like, I don't know, like you tell me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for a long time we really, we thought that it was like exposure to the vaginal microbiome that was really important for infants. But now, I think it was like, oh no, actually it's this exposure to feces that you get, to mum's poo with birth, that's where you get, that kind of more persistent seeding of microbes. Like those vaginal microbes be there very temporarily. So there have been a number of studies looking at vaginal seeding where that practice is done that you just described, and they haven't really borne out results that are that exciting. They haven't really suggested it was really necessarily that made that much of an impact. And I guess, it comes up a lot for me in practice, and I do worry about I guess just the stress of, you've just given birth and then you've got to quickly do this thing. And so I worry about that. And then I guess we also worry, it's quite, and I guess, sort of trust nature and biology, when you're yeah, when you're doing something that's simulated, I guess
Yep.
you have to be a little bit careful. Like, are we overriding some of the mechanisms that would prevent
Yep.
less helpful microbes being picked up?
Yep.
Is there a chance of infection that, that we kind of have in that more artificial, when we're doing
Yes.
something so artificially? And then also, I mean, those research studies, they're very careful, where they would just really kind of assess for, herpes or other things that could be potentially dangerous before
Mm.
before before conducting that experiment. So I guess there's those sort of questions around, like, is there a possible risk associated with doing that, and is there actually much benefit? I mean, it's really parents' choice, of
Yes.
course. I think the thing is just to really get well informed about the pros and cons about it, and also just, I guess, if you kind of compare that to the literature on breastfeeding and how that helps with the microbiome resilience following a cesarean birth, there's a really strong kind of there's a strong body of evidence to show that really helps to get that ecosystem back on course. Whereas it's pretty like yeah, most of those studies haven't actually found it to really help to get the ecosystem back on course when it comes
Wow.
to
That's
the
really
time
interesting.
feeding.
And I think like what you said, I guess it's another thing that the mother has to do to, like, and it's to kind of hear that, maybe there's not as much benefit as what is led to believe. I think that also just takes the pressure off them, which they're clearly in a very compromised, vulnerable position where they've, where they're not having to think of something extra to do. But you also mentioned about the feces and being, I guess, the biggest inoculator, which I think about, again, my sisters who have had babies and there's the obvious thing of like, oh, I pooed everywhere, and it's something where you just like, well, that's it, we didn't know it now, but like that's great.
Yeah, yeah, it's a gift. I know. I remember thinking, oh gosh, I hope I don't poo while I'm giving birth, as if it's like the worst thing. But like, of course, there's probably some reason for the positioning of everything.
Definitely, yeah, it
And
makes.
generally, the way that bubs come out when they've got an anterior presentation is everything's just lined up perfectly
Oh,
to
look,
receive
again,
that gift. Yeah.
that's nature at its finest. So we've spoken about I guess the fecal I guess benefit. We've spoken a little bit about breastfeeding, which I want to get onto a bit later, but I guess how is, and this you might have already answered, but so is the infant's microbiome seeded and colonized at birth through that fecal exposure, or are there other things that do it, or is it mostly that fecal exposure?
Mm, yeah, and I guess maybe I just feel like I should circle back to that
Yeah, go
cesarean
for it.
births and situation, and also thinking about, I
Mm.
guess, the other thing that I think we could really be focusing on is really helping that mother infant have skin to skin, and
Yeah.
just that kind of early important skin to skin time. And that's the other thing I worry about, quick, let's do this swabbing kind of interfering with that moment, where you're first meeting your baby. Yeah, so coming back to seeding, how important is birth with seeding? It certainly is a really important seeding time with getting exposed to the fecal microbiome. And I think, the way that I think that the vaginal microbiome may help, being coated with the vaginal kind of secretions, that nice acidic kind of environment and those microbes, and then meeting the fecal microbiome as you come out, may help, I guess, steer which microbes we pick up. We don't know, but
Mm.
there's a possibility there's a bit of an interplay there.
Hmm.
But then after birth with breastfeeding, we're actually learning that breast milk actually might be responsible for a third to two-thirds of the infant microbiome seeding in those early weeks. So it's a really important contributor and an ongoing one. And I guess you can see, as I mentioned before, because there's the fecal microbes also present in breast milk, that if you miss out on getting that fecal exposure, there's this second chance of getting that through the breast milk, which is, that's biology having kind of resilience in it.
I love that. Yeah, and like you said, there's a sense of resilience in what we're talking about, and there's also opportunity where, like you said, if there's a cesarean and if there's the ability to breastfeed, that we've got another chance here to kind of get what we may have missed out on in that initial process. So, can we talk about, I guess, those stages in that early infant microbiome development, and when does that infant microbiome start to resemble that of an adult?
Yeah, sure. So soon after birth, the ecosystem is kind of quite almost quite inflammatory, actually. But we think that this short kind of exposure to this kind of fairly inflammatory microbe picture is really important for immune training. And then quickly, under the influence of breast milk, it tends to really shift to become this special infant ecosystem, which tends to be dominated with bifidobacteria and has like a certain kind of pattern associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, infants will stay with that ecosystem for the period that they're exclusively breastfed. And then as solids start to come in, the ecosystem starts to shift. So that ecosystem, that we call it like the breastfeeding orientated ecosystem, is fairly low in diversity,
Mm-hmm.
and it has like these key players present that seem to have an ancient relationship with humans that seem to be inherited and fed
Mm-hmm.
by a certain substance in the breast milk that selectively feed these microbes that play important roles for the infant's development. So yeah, they'll be very dominant until the point that solids starts to come. We'll start to see a shift happening as solids come in, and the ecosystem will start to diversify at
Mm-hmm.
that point, but it will still have the influence of these, these key features, these key characters, if you like, in the ecosystem that are still kind of guiding things along. And then we'll have another shift again with the cessation of breastfeeding, where the ecosystem will become more diverse again. And so in terms of, I guess, the normal time for the infant's ecosystem to kind of grow into becoming more adult-like, that's still an area of research and debate, but it's probably somewhere between 5 and 7 years. So it seems like every time there's a bit more research done, we're like, oh, actually later, oh, it's actually later, that we
Yeah.
start to, that even a 5-year-old, the ecosystem's still continuing to diversify, and potentially even a 7-year-old still diversifying.
Just, I guess, for people listening to this, so the hallmarks really is, I guess, the fact that in terms of the differences between that infant and adult, it sounds like it's that infant microbiome has got less diversity and it's got more that bifidobacterium prioritization or colony there versus, I guess, an adult. And we're thinking not 7 or 8-year-old, like we're thinking like 20, 30, 40-year-old. We're talking
Yeah.
about ideal. We want like hundreds of species of all different types. Are there any other things which real key differences, or is that kind of like the main key differences?
Yeah, I think those are the main key
Yeah.
differences. I mean, the other one, which I mean, people may or may not be familiar with, is that the types of bacterial products that are made in an infant ecosystem are a little different to an adult. So,
Yeah.
in an infant ecosystem, we have more acetate, whereas in an adult ecosystem, we're really wanting butyrate. So,
Yeah.
that's kind of to do with the change in the type of microbes that are present. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that also makes sense from a practitioner perspective where, testing the microbiome, it's very different because you can't be looking at an infant's microbiome and using it to the same, I guess,
Yeah.
you can't be thinking, oh, well, you don't have enough butyrate or you don't, like you're
It's so
looking at
low
different,
in diversity. Oh
yeah.
my goodness, what, like, we've got to do something.
Yeah. Whereas if you understand, you're like, that's kind of
This is
tracking.
this is looking beautiful. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah,
So,
because we talk about a precocious ecosystem as an indication of a disturbance. So when that ecosystem rushing ahead and
mm,
developing, becoming diverse earlier is actually kind of like something that's correlated with some of these adverse health outcomes that we mentioned before, particularly kind of the metabolic health kind of challenges such as obesity and diabetes and things like that later in life, is we don't want that ecosystem rushing ahead. We want it to have adequate time under the influence of these kind of guides in the gut, if you like, that are kind of
yeah.
the coach that's sort of training the gut barrier function and sort of helping to train that immune system, make sure it's got kind of adequate time there before it goes on to the next stage.
Oh, that's fantastic. Like I love hearing that because again, we all, we don't want to be, it's just showing that like there is a purpose to why things are developing in the time frame to which they need to develop, whether we're still understanding that to the full degree, but yeah, it's very clear that we don't go from a very a lack of diversity to total diversity in a short period of time, that there's stages to that. That's
Mm.
very cool. I like that a lot. So I think like I wanted to go back to the breast milk situation because I want to know about the microbiome a bit more. And we've spoken about, I guess, there can be how it's such an important and amazing way we can see the infant microbiome. So How does the breast milk microbiome differ to the gut microbiome? And I guess I'm thinking you can speak to whether that is an infant or adult microbiome, but like what's so special and different about this breast milk microbiome?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think if you looked at the breast milk microbiome and the infant gut microbiome next to each other, you'll have like similar microbes present there, but the
Hmm.
abundance levels will be different in those. So, there's certain, like if you look in the breast milk microbiome, like there'll be bifidobacteria often there, but it'll be at very low amounts. Whereas in the infant, the bifidobacteria, which gets shared from that breast milk microbiome to the infant, will be, like it'll be fed up, and it'll be like really dominant in that ecosystem. So we'll see a lot of crossover in terms of who's there, but the amount of who's there in each ecosystem will be quite niche specific, will kind of relate to that environment. So we'll see yeah, different abundance levels of things. I guess the other thing is like the breast milk microbes, the actual abundance of microbes in breast milk is a lot lower than it is in poo,
Yep.
which is kind of, I think, kind of reassuring, really. But the human body has these amazing, we're just learning about it, but there seems to be all these incredible strategies to help transfer the useful microbes to the infant. So,
Mm.
so even though there's low abundance of particularly helpful microbes in breast milk and also in maternal stool, there's these special strategies to help transfer those important microbes to the infant. So there's been some really interesting research where they've gone to kind of, I guess, research sharing of microbes between infants and their mother, and they've found them. They've looked at the microbes in the infant, and
Yep.
then they've gone to search for them in their stool sample and breast milk sample, and found them there, but in such low levels that they wouldn't have picked them up if they just used a regular like test that we might use. Like they're at kind of below detectable levels,
Yeah.
but but the body's got a way of getting them across, which I think is a really important thing clinically, because
Yep.
sometimes you could do a test and go, oh, you've got no bifidobacteria, you've got nothing good to give to your infant, but we're like, actually, think again, like, and this is this sort of problem I guess we can potentially have being humans, where we can think that we know best and we can look at a test result and be like, I know what's happening here. But
Yes.
just to go, oh, wow, these mothers are sharing microbes with their infants at below detectable levels.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is important, I think, especially for, like you said, clinicians and practitioners that are testing in this area, but also for parents, carers, mothers, whoever that may have got results and thinking, oh no, oh no. And, I think just thinking a bit critically, that's like, hang on a second, like this could actually be totally fine.
Yeah.
The quality, the type, the accuracy of testing, but also just the levels that we're talking about. So, I think that hopefully that people can take a bit more of a breath thinking, I'm still doing a
Mm.
good job. It's just not necessarily
Absolutely.
detectable.
And I think, I mean, the other thing I guess about breast milk is it's not just the bacteria that are in there. There's
Mm,
all the, I guess, okay, so we've got strategies for help pass things on, but we also know that breast milk is, it's kind of like the master gardener of the infant gut, really. So it's like
yes.
it's seeding. So we've just been talking about seeding,
Yep.
but it's also like feeding or fertilizing those
Yep.
microbes. So it's like an abundant source of the human milk oligosaccharides. They're like the third most prominent or abundant substance in breast milk, more than protein. If you dehydrate milk, take the water out,
Yep.
they're the third most abundant solid substance in breast milk. So body has just decided that this is worthwhile to
Yes.
make this amount of this important kind of substance into milk, and we appreciate they're a really important prebiotic for feeding up the bifidobacteria in particular, but also other helpful microbes for the infant. So we've got this feeding or fertilizing, and they each mother will have this unique set. So it's not like you can just replace it. Like each
Yeah.
mother will have potentially up to 50 different human milk oligosaccharides that they'll have in their milk, and they'll be a unique pattern, which potentially is a nice match to the microbes that are shared within that family. And then also, there's many other kind of prebiotic substances in milk as well. And then we have the weeding because there's all the selective antimicrobial substance or substances that help to kind of prevent harmful bacteria from growing as well. So it's really
What a magical substance.
yeah, it is.
You're like, yeah, I know. That's why like I'm studying, and that's why you're the go-to in this, because it really is like this packaged up, it's so beautifully designed, in terms of how we are as a human, in terms of its role and what it does to the next generation. Like it is quite remarkable, but it makes
Yeah,
total sense at the same time. But I guess
yeah,
as we're
yeah,
starting to understand that, you can really appreciate it. Because I think people think milk, lactose. Like that's kind of
yeah.
like the simplicity when you're like, oh, no way. Like there's so much more cool stuff going on. And just to kind of hear that there's all the different types of prebiotics, like feeding what you've just seeded and like how it can be individual and mother specific. Like that is so cool. Like I love
Isn't
that
it
so much.
amazing? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just love it that like every week there's a new substance discovered in human milk. And like it's still, it's still got so much mystery. Like, oh wow, we found this new substance in human milk and this is what it does. Like, and so yeah, there's just layer upon layer
Oh, the
to
mysterious
learn.
milk. Love
Yes.
this. So for people that are, I guess, wondering, and I guess is a question which could be a bit of a silly question, but like, how do we get bacteria in our milk? Are we born with it? Are there things that can affect that breast milk, I guess, environment or what it's made up of? Or yeah, like what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, this is still an area of exploration for sure, but I guess I could sort of think there's kind of three main ways that you
Mhm.
might get bacteria into breast milk. There might be some that come like from skin, and I guess originally that's where we thought it all came from.
Yep.
And then we also learned that the infant can inoculate the breast, so there can be like a bit of sharing from the infant. But really, what's really extraordinary is the research showing that there's an enteromammary pathway, like a transfer of microbes from the mother's intestine to the breast milk. So it does seem like there's particular immune cells that might sample and kind of like carry a bacteria all the way through the lymphatic system to the breast, and they have tagged and observed that in not in humans but in mice and in cows. So it does, there's kind of growing evidence for that, and I guess it explains why we are finding that there are all these microbes that are also present in the gut in breast milk. Are they there before give birth? I mean, I think that's also an area that's really under exploration. It does seem that some are, and then I guess with the change of your breast tissue during pregnancy, that perhaps there's kind of a more kind of environment that would a nicer niche for them to grow, I guess. So certainly before giving birth, when people do colostrum samples, they find these microbes present. So before birth, so we know they're around before the infant's sort of
Yeah.
interacting with the breast, which is exciting and amazing. And I guess the thing that for some people that are like, oh, I really want to do that vaginal seeding, maybe another option is collect a bit of colostrum, and
Yes.
then I mean, I would never want that colostrum to interfere with breastfeeding,
Yep.
because you want the real-time milk, because the milk's adapting all the time to
Yep.
what's going on right now for that
Yes.
infant. But you could actually collect some colostrum before giving birth, and that colostrum could be collected before you had the antibiotics, for example. You asked about things that might affect the breast milk microbiome.
Yeah.
Interestingly, having a high plant food diet seems to be very protective of the breast milk microbiomes. Yeah,
I'm
don't
like,
look.
yep.
You're
Back.
like,
We love
I'm not
plants.
surprised. But they looked at the breast milk microbiome of mothers who were having a cesarean birth, and antibiotics, and they found that there was a lot of resilience, and the bifidobacteria were more likely to persist when mothers were having a high plant food diet. So I guess just
I love
just
that.
kind of those basic kind of health principles of eating well
Yeah.
can make an impact there.
Oh, I love that because again, like while we're getting into like, oh, it's a new thing that we're exploring and the mystery of the breast milk, that there is evidence already kind of showing us that the health basics, exactly like what you said, they're things that we can be doing right now. Like I think anybody in the gut world knows that is educated and knows what they're talking about, knows that plants are protective in that. So to actually also see that being of benefit in this situation, that is so empowering. Like mothers to be, parents to be can say, like, if we up our plants, this is going to be hugely protective for whatever may happen in the birth suite and thereafter. Like,
Mm.
that is very empowering. I love hearing that. Um, so let's talk about the, I guess we've spoken a little bit about that. And actually, before I go on, was there anything else that disrupts the breast milk microbiome?
Unfortunately, antibiotics do seem to, but I guess the good news there is there seems to be bounce back, which we're not surprised about. So you might get them, the bifidobacteria suppressed, but then they bounce back. So
Mm.
it seems to be, within a couple of weeks they're bouncing back based on some of the early studies in this area. And interestingly, just coming back to the plants, like if you're less likely to have that occur if you are having
Yeah.
that good intake of plant foods. So.
Yeah, and that would be the same advice that we're giving to adults that aren't in a situation with an infant that, they're breastfeeding or anything like that, where if you take antibiotics, we want there to be lots of plants, lots of fiber. Like, it's that same
Mm.
thing of how do we support that? So again, it's just like there's parallels there, even though we're finding that it's beneficial in all these different ways. So talking about, I guess, the look, microbiome disruptors for infants. The one that I know my sisters were like, I want to know more about this and how we can, I guess, support ourselves against that or support their infants against that is antibiotics. Because, kids are at daycare, they're a lot of the time they are suggested quite early on because, again, if there's respiratory issues, like there's just a lot of fear around, obviously,
Mm.
wanting to act on something that could potentially be life-threatening to children. Fair enough, but at the same time, they're like, I don't want to give my child antibiotics, or how do I help, offset some of this damage? I don't want it to damage their microbiome. Like, it's just such a stressful issue. I know, just listening to my sisters and friends that have children. So, like, what can we do? Like, what is the impact? What can we do to kind of help protect against that potential damage?
Yeah, and it is really tricky, isn't it? Because you're like, oh, I don't want them to have antibiotics, but then there are times when they really need it,
100%.
and then it's really hard to navigate which time you're in.
Yes.
Am I in one of those times or not?
Yeah.
Can we wait or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's some very interesting research that's come out around breastfeeding and antibiotic exposure, which this is from the child cohort, which is a really large cohort from Canada, where they've been following these children, and they've been very interested in the risk of asthma. And I guess, there's been, a real kind of, I guess, a reflection and change in practice since we've noticed this association between early life antibiotics and allergic disease. And so this study has been sort of studying that and looking at asthma development. And they had a population that were where they were comparing antibiotic exposure while that child was still being breastfed versus antibiotic. Well, this is infants, so up
Yep.
to kind of I think they were up 0 to 12-month-olds. So while they were being breastfed versus if they weren't being breastfed. And they found that the ones that weren't being breastfed at the time of having antibiotics had a 3-fold increase of risk of developing asthma, which is kind of in, maybe a little higher than what the stats usually are, but it's sort of in line with. But the ones that were being breastfed at the time of having antibiotics had no increased risk of asthma, which was pretty stunning. So that, and then they looked at the microbiome of these infants, and they saw that the important kind of beneficial microbes were retained in the breastfed infants, even with exposure to antibiotics. And they even found it with exposure to several courses of antibiotics. This
Oh,
still held true. So I guess we are, when we talked about all those things that are in human milk that support the infant's ecosystem, they also really support repair and recovery after a disturbance.
yes.
And so you can kind of see how, that makes sense in that situation. And so you kind of like, when I'm working with mums that have a breastfed infant, I'm like, oh, do I need to give them something? I'm like, you've already
You do. Yeah.
you've got that.
Yeah.
Your body's
Yeah.
got that.
Yeah.
You've got
Yeah.
the perfect individualized symbiotic for
Love
your
that.
infant. That this is that they're protected and supported in this. I think it is really hard when you're at daycare, though, isn't it? When you're getting like
Oh,
that.
it's a little cesspit of, yeah,
Yeah.
everything.
And I think one of the things that I encourage families to do is just try and, if their child's, been sick, to try and give them a little bit more time to convalesce. So when they go back to daycare, they've just had, their immune system's had a little bit of a chance to regroup, because it's
Yeah.
that thing, it's really hard. You're a parent, you've got work pressure, and you're like, and they just, they, okay, all right, I think Harry's better enough, huh? And then you send them in, and then like, I don't know, a few days later they come down with something else, and you're just on this. But I think it probably means less sick days overall if you can just find a
Mm,
way to give them a little bit more time to convalesce, so that
yeah.
they're, because your immune system is a bit down after an infection. So I guess that's the other thing that I would say. And if they're not breastfeeding, then I think that it is place for using a prebiotic and a probiotic to help protect them during that antibiotic exposure.
Yeah. And, would that supplemental aspect, would that be dependent on, is that dependent on any particular factor or lots of factors? Or, yeah, like obviously this isn't prescription, but are
Mm.
there certain things that, generally speaking, there's research to say it supports, or, is, I guess, mimicking to the best of the ability, the breast milk environment, or, how do people navigate that?
Yeah, good question.
I think I
I
asked
think,
about 20.
yeah, I'm like, yeah, good questions, I should say. Megan Azard, who's the lead researcher in that study I was just describing, she has this great thing that I heard her say, and it was in response to someone asking, like, how we're going with infant formula being, similar to breast milk. If we add, because there's some infant formulas around now that include some of these human milk oligosaccharides in them, like 1 to 4, not 50, but 1 to 4, and they're in quite low concentrations. And they're like, is that making it more similar to breast milk? And she
Mm,
said, well, if I stand on my roof, I'm closer to the moon. So I think this is,
yeah.
like everything we can do that makes formula a little bit better is worth doing, but we do need to put it in perspective, and I think
Yeah.
but yes, so that's a really big question around like younger infants. I think that kind of probably needs some more kind of careful one-to-one consideration.
For
But I do
sure.
think there's value in if we want to explore always, whether there's other support that could be given to that family to kind of overcome or understand better the breastfeeding challenge in that situation, and not quickly kind of rush down to recommending an alternative. And
Yeah.
I guess, does link me back to some other points that I want to say, but maybe you can remind me and I'll come
Oh,
back there just so I could
go to them now. Go to
go
them
to them
now.
now. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think it's sort of helpful because we're in this sort of Western context, and we can sometimes not be aware of this, but the World Health Organization's guidelines on the safest thing to feed an infant is, first, mum's own milk direct from the breast. Second, expressed breast milk from mum's own expressed milk.
Mm,
Third, donor milk. Yeah,
yeah.
so from a safe, screened source.
Yep.
Fourth, infant formula, because it's made to a particular controlled standard. So we've got things in place to prevent excesses and underages of key nutrients, and so
Yep.
that. And then fifth, least safe is goat's milk or cow's milk or something that someone tried to put together.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess we kind of got that understanding of that spectrum. So if we've got a younger infant, a more vulnerable infant, that isn't able to directly breastfeed, and we do really want to really properly explore that,
Yeah.
then consideration of whether sourcing donor milk is appropriate for that family
Yeah.
makes sense, as if you're following that guideline, which is a guideline for all countries. And that's why in preterm infants in the hospitals, they are making sure wherever they can that they can have either their mother's own milk or donor milk, because
Hmm.
it saves their lives.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just to kind of put it into that context. So now I've gone right off on a tangent, so where would you like me to pick back up?
I mean, I think like I didn't realize, and I think it's good to know that that's like a WHO kind of standard, because I guess like, and especially I think the recognition of that donor milk, because I thought maybe that was a lot more controversial than maybe what it actually is. Like, I think I might be going kind of off, also off what I guess we plan to talk about, but like, is that readily available, like in terms of that donor milk? Because I think like that sounds incredible for that to be maybe that third best option, but I don't think I hear about that often.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like sourcing donor milk is, yeah, not always easy, and you do want to be making sure it's coming from a good, well-known source. There are milk banks, but they tend to reserve that milk for vulnerable infants, so they get that first. So, but if someone is in a situation where, like, it's not always, people aren't always aware of that, they might have a fairly young infant, and just to know that, it's worth, investigating the milk banks. And then sometimes, people just, they do have, friends or relatives that are really happy to donate some milk to them, and they're able to have those really clear conversations and make sure mums have had the appropriate medical screening. And I see that a lot in practice. There's a whole kind of network. And I guess if you kind of think, like wet nursing, and that's what people did before. Yeah. And so, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking historically this was far more accepted, and there wasn't the ribbon around it. And I totally understand wanting to make sure that the breast milk is, like the mothers that are providing that, or the women that are providing that, like that it is of quality, and that it is safe. But yeah, historically, like babs were passed around all the time. And I think again, that's just something which you do, you just think about in terms of like how our lives and as a society, how there are things that have changed, and you think, wow, we're missing out on that. And I guess this is probably another question which I don't know if you've got the answer, of the research has around that, especially because it's not done as much as what it was historically. But um, are there differences and benefits to, I guess, that wet nursing kind of, donation milk in the microbiome? Like, do you see differences in the microbiome, or is that kind of like, I don't know, is there any studies around that?
Yeah, I haven't seen any, but it was an excellent question. And, I guess, for some of the families I've worked with where they've had, some really difficult situation arise where mum, has to be on chemo or something and isn't able to breastfeed, it's been a real comfort for her to know that, when she's had, a network that have been able to provide some milk for her infant. I guess that's been a little bit of a silver lining to think, oh, well, what other, contributions are coming from those mums in terms of microbes and other health bioactive components in their milk that they're being exposed to.
I think from this talk that like what's really kind of hit home for me is like the resilience, and not only the resilience, but like the kind of like the workaround and like the connect, like just the workaround that our body has to for our infants to be seeded and feeded properly. Like if one thing doesn't happen, you've kind of mentioned if that doesn't happen, don't worry, it happens in the breast milk. Or if that happens in the breast milk, don't worry, it'll pick. Like there's just all these different strategies that have been inbuilt in us to kind of make sure that it kind of doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but yeah, there's many different roads to kind of still get to the same outcome of a healthy and diverse and resilient microbiome. And even what you mentioned about the antibiotics, which I know is such a big thing, to hear that there is resilience and that, breast milk and, looking at what's happening in the family dynamic and the road for convalescence, like it was I didn't expect you to come on here and like be alarmist, but you've definitely made me feel more calm about having my own kids one day. I'm like, they'll be right,
That's good.
And hopefully for any like mothers to be, or families that are listening to this, that they're kind of taking a bit of a breath as well and just kind of thinking like, hey, everything that is happening is exactly what should be happening. I think it's just we can get so stressed about things because we don't understand it. And I think this for me has been a really comforting conversation.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Now, I do want to, I guess, end it on, I like to ask the expert, I guess, their number one piece of advice that they want to leave to the audience, for anyone that is, I guess, with in respect to any of the things that we've spoken about, what would be your number one piece of advice? And sometimes it could be two or three because it's hard to narrow it down. So what would be your parting advice?
Wonderful. Can I just circle back to one thing and then go to that? Is that all right?
Yes, definitely.
Because we were talking about antibiotics, and before we got on, we were talking about how it's a common concern mothers can have. They have to take antibiotics. And
yes.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to just quickly talk about that for a moment, because it comes up so often for me in clinical practice that mothers are like, oh, I've got to have antibiotics for this reason. Like, oh no, like, should I pump and dump? Like,
yes.
What's really extraordinary is how clever the breast is at being kind of I guess a barrier. It's not going to be the case for everything, but for most antibiotics, the amount secreted into breast milk is extremely minimal. And so it's likely to only have a very, very subtle, if any, effects on the infant microbiome. So I just to kind of mention that it does depend on the antibiotics. So, it's always worth having that conversation with the healthcare providers, like, is this antibiotic compatible with breastfeeding? And they can go to there's some excellent resources out there that can tell you, which drugs are transferred into milk and which ones aren't. And but for most antibiotics, they're very minimally transferred. But
again, another exhale for everyone out there that's kind of thinking, oh no, I've had to go on antibiotics because, you got mastitis, a UTI, something like that, where
you're like, I had a cesarean birth and then I had to have antibiotics. And you kind of think, you have this sense that you're just like, building up on kind of, I don't know, disruption.
Yeah. Oh, look, thank you for just, I thought in a previous thing we've mentioned that was discussed, but I don't think it's as explicitly as that. So I'm glad that you're like, I need to circle back to that. So, your parting advice or advices, what would you like to share with everyone?
So if you're pregnant or planning a pregnancy, I guess one of the things, we often very focused on the birth, prepping for the birth, and that rightly so. There's a rite of passage, but I think putting some time into preparing for breastfeeding, after this conversation, we've probably seen why we think that might be important. Just because there are so many myths and things that can act as barriers. So kind of before you're kind of amongst it, before you're right there, like immediately trying to breastfeed, just having done a bit of that lead work, so you understand how breasts work, you know where to go if you have challenges, you can recognize, like early on if there seems to be a challenge going on, so you can get good help, because like many areas, there's real problems with conflicting advice. The Australian Breastfeeding Association is a reliable place to go. I really encourage using that organisation. They're a wonderful volunteer organisation. They've been around for a long time, started by 3 women in a kitchen together.
Love that.
And it really is, the information that you get there is really trustworthy. They've got their helpline, which is just a great place to call if you're having any trouble, and they offer breastfeeding courses that you can do during pregnancy, and they also have courses for health professionals as well. And they're just a trusted place, because it's fair to say there's lots of information that you can get that will not be helpful. So, but if you go there, that you'll get really good, helpful information. Then you can use that as, if something other information comes in, you can check it against that. You keep going back here. So I think that's critical. I can't believe how many people I've worked with where breastfeeding has unraveled because of just some really poor information. It's really unfortunate. So that's, I think, the most important probably piece that I think that's probably, I could say other things, but I think that's the most important piece.
And I'm glad that you said that, because I think that was what sparked me to have this conversation, is not only its importance, but just the misinformation out there. So to not only learn and listen to you, but to have another resource that they can, I guess, cross-reference. Like, obviously go to that one, like you've said, if there's and which I'll put the link in the show notes as well, as a place to get information. But if you are listening to someone on social media, or you are listening to another podcast or something, and you're listening to something and you're like, I don't know, is that right? That's a really, like, I love that. I think that's a really great piece of information to leave people with, that will hopefully help them and just make them feel a little bit more empowered and controlled, less confused about this clearly very important, journey of infancy, and looking after little bubs. So, Dawn, if people want to work with you or learn more from you, practitioners and/or prospective patients, how do they do that? How do they connect with you?
Well, there's a Microbiome Restoration Centre. I've got some of my courses available there. And then my clinical practice is at Gould's Natural Medicine. Practice is quite full, but I work with some wonderful colleagues. So we all support each other. So
love that.
If you weren't getting in with me, you could get in with one of them.
Great. We love that. And that's often the case where the person I have on, they're like, books are pretty full, but you're there kind of helping impart this information to other prackies, because we need clearly more in this field. So I'll put that information down there as well for people to click on. Dawn, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation, and just thank you for your generosity in sharing everything that you have.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.